Hello, everyone. It's good to be here tonight. I really miss being in person, giving presentations, but the beauty of this is that potentially there's availability to more participants, plus it also is recorded for viewing later. So there's some real good pluses to having a Zoom video, but nevertheless, smiling faces are nice too. So I guess instead I'll just have to look at smiling names. So what I'm going to do now is share my screen. Like Sarah said, this is an introduction to container gardening. And what I've tried to do is gear it towards people who are new at gardening and, so that I try to not make it too complicated, I hope. And so anybody that's really experienced at gardening, hopefully there's a few facts in here that maybe they didn't know before, so they can learn some new things that way. But mostly, I hope I geared it towards just new gardeners who have never done it before. So here we go. Now, I'd like to point out that healthy plants are happy plants. And a little story behind this flower here. I took this picture last year, and I think the master gardeners on right now have probably seen it before. But it's a mutant. It's a mutant, I think, Rudbeckia. And it has a big smiling face. It looked at us smiling each morning for quite a while. And so the thing about this is it reminded me of something else. If anybody has seen Men in Black, there was a subway creature that appeared through the grates as a flower, but below the surface, this flower, and his name was Jeff, was a 600-foot worm that terrorized the subways. So when I saw this flower in my garden, it occurred to me as I was looking down this stem, what might be below that? Is this flower harmless? Because I'd seen Men in Black quite a few times, and that's the first thing that crossed my mind. So nevertheless, I do want to point out that healthy plants are happy plants, and that's our goal here, is to grow healthy plants, not only in container gardening, but raised beds and normal gardening too. But tonight the topic is container gardening. Okay, benefit of container gardening is minimal space is required. Sometimes people have poor soil conditions in the yard, and this is a solution around it. That for whatever reason, their yard is such that it would take a major amendment to their soil to make it conducive to gardening. So, instead of doing that, it's probably just as well to try container gardening. The thing with container gardening is there's less possibility of diseases and weeds when you use soil as potting media. It gives you flexibility on location of where you want to grow things. It can be less physically strenuous, and that goes right along in line with what is nowadays called adaptive gardening, is a more kinder way of saying senior gardening, because adaptive gardening really isn't just for seniors, but it's for people who have physical restrictions. And the thing with container gardens, it helps in that regard because, generally it's less stooping down and it's a smaller garden that you're working with. Something else I like about container gardening is that it can accent the landscape. You can do really pretty things with your landscape with containers and kind of become an amateur landscape designer and, mess around with how you want to improve the looks of your own landscape, your own yard. Now, some other benefits that come with container gardening is it's good for beginner gardeners, of course, because you don't have to really involve too much with container gardening. You can dabble in it just a little bit and see how you like it first. Another thing about container gardening is, as with a regular garden, if you're very successful with it, you stand the chance of being inundated with harvest, like tomatoes or cucumbers and such. Well, with container gardening, that is not generally the case. You can control more how much you harvest. However, for those who do regular gardening, this is a shameless plug for what Master Gardener Program supports something called Plant a Row for the Hungry. So where we take our excess produce and donate it to the food bank so that it can be distributed to people who could use that produce. Another thing about container gardening is that it can contain less aggressive plants like anise hyssop or mint or ice plant or anything like that, that if you just had it in a regular garden, it could really take over quick. Another example or another benefit of container gardening is if you live in an area of the county where you're dealing with gophers or moles, especially if you have sandy soil. Gophers and moles, if they're not eating the plant, I think gophers actually eat plants and moles just kind of tear up the roots. Nevertheless, that can cause a problem too. You also, with container gardening, you can change to a different location due to what's called microclimate, which is really just the localized climate in your yard or in your location that has a different climate than maybe another area of your yard. For instance, if you have a lot of shade or if you have heat coming off concrete or such, where you could move your plants into a different location so that they can thrive better. And one more benefit of container gardening that occurred to me today is people might have a problem in homeowners associations because their backyards where they're only allowed to have a fence that's a metal fence where you can see through it. And sometimes homeowners associations may not like people to have gardens or raised gardens showing. So this is another way to get around that, is if you want to grow specific things, specific vegetables and such, you can do it in a container and it would be less conspicuous. All right, so what do you need to start? A container, obviously, you need growing media, which is another word for potting mix. Of course, plants, sunlight or light, water, and plant food, or also known as fertilizer. Okay, now we're going to cover the common types of containers. First of all, there's plastic. Plastic is lightweight and durable. However, it can have a shorter lifespan because the UV rays from the sun can beat down on plastic and cause it to weaken over time. Plastic has good varieties available. They're generally inexpensive. The thing about plastic, though, is that sides may heat up too much, so you got to watch that. And they are also not porous, which is a good thing in a sense because they retain the water a little longer than a porous container. Next one's clay containers, or also known as terracotta. These, the unglazed containers like these are porous. And the thing about these particular pots is because they're porous in the nature of the material, what they do is they absorb soluble salts. Soluble salts are really salts that dissolve in water and are present in such things as fertilizer and sometimes water itself. So what happens on clay pots like this is the soluble salts start showing on the outside of it and maybe on the rim. And what it looks like is like a white powdery look on it. So that's something to consider. Clay pots obviously can break easily, but they have also a classic look about them. So that's good too. Here's my favorite, I think, is glazed ceramic. Glaze helps prevent the cracking. Again, these are non-porous, so you won't have seepage through the walls of the pot. They can be breakable and they can be heavy, like the example in the picture there. It looks pretty good size. So there's a possibility once you have it with the soil potting mix in it and such that it could become a little bit heavy to move if you needed to. And another thing about glazed ceramic is that there's a lot of colors available. Here's Wood's a good one too, and it's advised to either use redwood or cedar, and because these are relatively rot resistant, and so there's certain chemicals in wood that you have to watch out for. I'm not sure how prevalent that is. At one time, up to around 2004, it was more prevalent in building materials, but I think the EPA and such is taking care of that for the most part, unless you're finding old wood to use. But it says to avoid creosote, penton, phenolic. And if you do have treated wood, use copper treated, because that is to treat for fungi. And the good thing about wood is that it insulates roots from the summer heat, which is good around here. Okay. Galvanized containers, that has an interesting look to it too. And it has plenty of sizes and shapes available. They are more lightweight and durable than some things, such as the glazed pots. Thing with galvanized containers is you may need to drill holes in them, because by design, they aren't usually used for this purpose. Temperatures will fluctuate more between hot and cold. And in the summer, the roots can get too hot if you have them out in the direct sun. And some people may prefer these for ornamentals only due to the galvanizing process on it. Maybe they're uncomfortable with using it for food, for produce and such. So they may just use these for ornamentals. Okay, concrete planters. Now, when I see concrete planters, I picture big, tall concrete ones like you would see in front of the Clampett Mansion on the Beverly Hillbillies or something. Really, really extravagant looking things. And the thing about them is they do weigh a lot, so you don't want to move them if you can help it. But they are long lasting, especially if you don't move them. These are ideal for heat insulation. It keeps the roots a little cooler because of that insulation. Now, be careful if you do have these for winter maintenance, because the thing with these is if there's any water that's left in them, the water could potentially freeze and expand inside little cracks and such on concrete planters, and cause it to expand and it theoretically break them. Drawback with this is it's limited in color choice unless you spray paint them or something like that, and they can be expensive. Okay, grow bags. This is something that's my understanding is fairly new, as to what I've heard. They're, as you can see, they're probably very lightweight by the looks of this one, and inexpensive, and they're easy to store away if you're not using them. And draining well is a good thing about them, but they do not last as long as plastic and clay. And looking at them, I would say these are more for functional purpose rather than, clearly I wouldn't use them for landscape decoration. Okay, hanging pots and baskets or wall planters. The thing about these is they're such that you can generally reach them easier, especially if you have a watering wand to water them. But they're more at the eye level, and the thing about them also is you're able to utilize your space more because you're going vertical with them. So you can, it kind of keeps things out of the way for you. Now, here's a few more examples of thinking outside of the box. The ones on the left here are succulents. Now, actually the middle too, but the things about succulents is they're shallow rooted. So you can use things like you're seeing here, and this here in the middle is a strawberry pot where you can grow succulents in them like this and not have to worry about the roots being a problem, because again, they're shallow. And over on the right, somebody had a fall look about it with using the wheelbarrow. And we've done that at my house. We've used a wheelbarrow, and we've used it for mums and like this. And also we've grown lettuce in it, and it seems to work. And now over to the plumbing department. Now, some people may not like this in the yard. This is more for eclectic or whimsical decoration in your yard. So this is really one the homeowners association wouldn't like, I'm sure, but I like the one on the right with the tubs, and you can bury it in plants like they've done, or with plants surrounding it, you know, a little bit. But that really, I think that looks kind of neat there on the right. But that's utilizing toilets and sinks and bathtubs. Okay, there's some additional container considerations. First of all, probably the most important thing is that your container must have good drainage. That's critical when you do container gardening. And you also must have, your container must fit the full growth of whatever plant you're expecting to grow. So keep that in mind, because you want the roots to have a little growth in them, and you don't want a container that's so small that when your plant is fully grown, it tips over on you. Another thing is what I've mentioned before about microclimate around the container. So that's really just the climate in that specific location. So you need to be aware of, you know, how much sun it's getting, or the heat off of concrete or off the side of a house. So keep that in mind wherever you put your containers, or if you are putting your container like on the west side of the house in the summer, where it gets that summer heat very late into the day. Another suggestion is when you have a container that might be a pretty good size, especially when it's filled with the potting mix, you might want to consider a plant caddy, especially if it's something that you have to move around or would like to move around occasionally. There are plant caddies available for that purpose. Okay. And another thing to look out for, especially on a patio, or if you happen to be on a balcony above another apartment, for instance, is what happens underneath that container when you are watering the container. First of all, if you have a patio and such, and that container is directly on the patio, what can happen over time is you're probably going to get some stains on your patio from either the fertilizer or rust type stains. Generally, I'm picturing orange or white stains on your patio, but the orange ones are really bad. So what you need to do is have some kind of a collector, something to collect the water underneath it when you water your container, and then of course empty it when you're done, when the tray underneath fills up, so that it doesn't overflow. But then also you would want to elevate your container with some kind of stand, so you can put that collection device underneath. And so, as you can see, if you're watering a container and you're in a third floor balcony and somebody below is on the second floor, you know, on the balcony, they probably don't want to get wet all the time. So you have to consider that too. Okay, now on to the potting media. And I don't know why they call it media. I call it mix, but generally they call it media because I think they don't want to call it soil necessarily, because there are also what are called soilless mixes. Now, the thing with soilless mixes they are light mixes, because the deal is, first and foremost, and very important, is you don't want to use ground soil in a container. And the reason for that is the drainage. The ground soil will cause problems because it will eventually harden, and it will hold the water too much so that it doesn't drain out. And that's very key in potting containers, because you don't want to drown out the roots of your plant. So first and foremost, in addition to having proper drainage, is you don't want to use ground soil in your pots. So what is available is what's called soilless mix. And I have several brands here shown that are very reputable. Okay, and the deal with soilless mixes is generally, or they should be, free of disease, organisms, insects, and weeds. And the deal is, because it is not soil, it's a better chance of that. Plus, what they do, sometimes they do, and you should look for this possibly, is that the soil is pasteurized, which means the soil is kept at 180 degrees for 30 minutes to pasteurize the soil and kill these disease organisms, insects, and weeds. So they have to maintain that soil temperature at 180 degrees for 30 minutes. And there's also something called sterilization, which means they are doing the same thing with the soil, only they are maintaining the soil temperature at 212 degrees for 30 minutes. And the sterilization takes it beyond pasteurization because it also kills spores in the soil. So it's just an additional treatment to the soil. But the purpose of soilless mixes is that they are porous enough for root aeration and drainage. This is very important. You have to have pore space in your soil so that the roots have room for air and water, okay? So that they have to have the proper mix of that. You don't want your roots to drown in water, and they also need to have air so that they can process, the roots can process air and turn to CO2. And of course, drainage, as I've mentioned before, and that's very key. And then with soilless mix, the other piece of it is they retain enough water and nutrients, okay, for your particular, what you are growing in that pot. And commercial products may also add some lime. And the reason why they add some lime is because a lot of times these mixes have Canadian sphagnum peat moss. And Canadian specifically, sphagnum peat moss is very acidic. So they add some lime to the mix to offset some of that acidity, which most people, or in a lot of cases, you don't need the soil that acidic. There are some cases, and we're going to cover a case or two like that. But generally speaking, if they're adding lime to that mix, it's because the sphagnum peat moss is very acidic, and they're just trying to offset that a little bit. So basically, the four functions of media is to provide a stable substrate for root anchoring. It needs to provide a reservoir for nutrients. It needs to provide oxygen for the roots, and it needs to provide water for the roots. Okay. Now, you can also make your own potting mix. And this example here is really called a potting soil mix. And here's just one example. There's numerous ones, but generally, you need something that will hold moisture. And in this specific case, this is something called sphagnum peat moss. Also, something else that would work is pine bark. Shredded pine bark works for that purpose. And there's also what's called coir, C-O-I-R, and that is just the husk, shredded husk of coconuts. So those kind of things are used in the mix to be able to hold the moisture so that it doesn't just leach through too fast. Okay. Now, also to protect the pore space, or to provide pore space, it's what is available is what's called vermiculite or perlite. That's just light substances that give the soil some space, some pore space, like I said, for air to get in, and for the water and the air to work together without competing against each other. And then in this case, here's another piece of it is sterilized sandy loam soil. Okay, if you use this a little bit, it's the purpose of it is to drain. It's well draining and porous. Okay, and for a mix like this, the reason I believe a mix like this is good is because if you are growing particular plants that are a little heavier, you want something like this. You want a little bit of that kind of soil in it. In this case, sterilized sandy loam soil, in order to support that plant as it gets bigger. And then also, what you might want to add to this mix is calcitic or dolomitic lime. Now, if you can find it, dolomitic lime is better than calcitic because dolomitic lime contains calcium and magnesium, where calcitic lime just contains calcium. And that helps for plant growth and for to help the photosynthesis. I went blank. It's just to help the plant grow. Okay, dolomitic lime of the two is better. Now here are some potting tips before you begin. Okay, what you want to do is, if you're using old pots, sterilize it with a 10% bleach solution. 10% bleach, 90% water. Okay, and make sure that if there are no holes drilled in the pot, do that. And I think of these holes as being similar to a bowling ball. You know, at least have 3 good holes in it to drain the water out. And over those holes, you need to put a screen or a filter, because you don't want your potting media to leach or come draining through those holes when you're watering it. So that filter holds that in place. And before you use clay pots, be sure to soak those clay pots, because what happens is if you use a dry clay pot initially and it hadn't been soaked ahead of time, what happens is it wicks the water out away from what you just watered for the purpose of the plant, and it'll wick it out into the clay pot itself. But it won't do that if you soak it ahead of time. Another caution, or here's a caution as far as wearing gloves when working with potting mix. Now, it's my understanding it's very rare, but there is a possibility that you could pick up things that you don't want to. There's diseases and such, and one specifically is Legionella. You know, is what is similar to Legionnaire's disease. Now, I think this is very rare, but you might as well just wear gloves that gives you some flexibility while you're working, but also protect your hands for such a case. And always moisten the media before potting, because if you put that media in a pot and then you water it for the first time, the water will just go like a water on a duck's back. It won't soak in. It'll go along the sides. It'll work its way to the sides and work its way down the container. So what you're doing is probably just watering the outside of the container, not getting to the roots themselves. So be sure you moisten a little bit the media before you put it in the pot. Okay, now repotting or I'm having a hard time seeing the heading on my presentation, so I'm kind of seeing just a little bit. There's like a menu up on top of my screen, so it's kind of getting in my way. But this looks like repotting or replacing media, potting media. So what happens is when the plant gets too big in a pot, it becomes root bound, and you can see that when the roots start coming out the bottom of the plant, and they kind of just start encircling the plant, you know, and they'll start choking each other out. So when this happens, you need to take that plant out, kind of loosen the roots again on it, and upsize to a larger container. When potting media gets too hard, it's also time to replace it. And it will do that over time, especially out in the wind and the heat. So you could probably, although generally speaking, I think you can get through a good season with it, you know, with what you have. But this is more dealing with ornamental type plants and such. Another thing is organic materials break down, and this is talking about soil as potting media. Over time, those organic materials and when they break down, they stop doing what they're purpose for. In other words, for good drainage, retaining water, and et cetera. And then at the end of the harvest season, be sure and discard the plant and the media for produce and such that you're growing. Just obviously, you don't need that plant anymore. If it's a one season plant. So just discard that plant in the media and be ready to bleach that pot if you're going to use it again. Okay, watering. The thing about containers is the water is quickly lost. It drains through quicker than if you're growing plants in a raised bed or a standard garden, because it's kind of funneled down through. Plus, it's a lighter mix. It's a lighter mix than what your normal soil contains, and that's why the water is draining through quickly. Smaller containers dry out quicker. Smaller containers out in the sun and the wind really dry out quicker. So if your pots are out in the sun and the wind, be cautious about having a container that's too small, unless you're going to be very vigilant about staying on top of it and making sure it stays moist. Okay. Do not let the potting mix dry out. You can stick your finger down in the mix, maybe 1.5 inches or so, and test it and see if you should be watering that. Generally, during the summer and out in the wind and the heat again, if you know, you're probably going to have to water it every day. And morning water is best for the reason that you don't want the water to evaporate like it does later in the day. So the water will serve its purpose more if you're watering in the morning. And that's true with any kind of gardening, raised bed or otherwise. So that's nothing unusual. And now I would suggest using, if you can, using a sprinkling can when you water. If you use a hose for your containers, just make sure you have some kind of diffuser on the end, because if it has a powerful force coming out, you know, what's going to happen is the mix on the top of your container is going to get shot out of your container. So what you want to do is diffuse that water, and sprinkling cans will do that. Plus, by using a sprinkling can, you can put your dilute fertilizer in it and apply it that way through the sprinkler can. And of course, when you're away, be sure you have somebody around that's going to take care of your plants to water and fertilize as needed. Okay, because it won't take very long that they're going to start feeling it, especially the ones that are outdoors. Okay. Now, fertilizing. The thing about fertilizer is the nutrients leach out, and that's due to the water going through more quickly than if it had been in a regular garden. So your nutrients do leach out, and the lighter mixes that are soilless are going to require more frequent fertilizer. So there is dilute fertilizer, which here's a couple of suggestions: is Hyponex and Miracle Grow, two very good brands. And the dilute fertilizer is a water soluble, so you have that choice. It comes in, I believe, powder and liquid, and there's also fertilizer that's called they call it smart release usually, but it's a smart release or time release fertilizer, and it's what you do is get that in a pellet form. And Osmocote is a brand that's generally suggested for that. You know, that's a good brand to use. And the deal with fertilizer, I want to point out, is that you have to be careful with fertilizer that even though with container gardening, fertilizing has to be done more often, you still have to be vigilant against over fertilizing, because this can result in the buildup of soluble salts. Okay, so fertilizer by its nature has salt in it, and also when you add in, sometimes water has salt in it. So between that, or irrigation water anyway does, probably maybe through a well and such. But all I'm saying is that you have to watch out for buildup of soluble salts, because that will affect the roots of a plant. A plant will, over time or shortly over time, will not be able to uptake water through its roots because of salts. First, salts will pull water away from the roots when it's a problem, and then if too many salts get uptaken into the roots, pretty soon you will have your plants. You'll first start seeing a condition of chlorosis on your leaves, But then if it gets too bad, what's going to happen is the edges of your leaves are going to start um, having marginal burning or on the edges of those leaves. So that's where you can see, for example, that you are having a salt situation. And there is, somebody was probably going to ask this, I think, but is there a way to test soil in a container, a potting mix soil? And you don't do it the normal way of testing soil, but there is something called a pour through method. It's also called pour through extraction or pour through function, but the key words are pour through. And I'm not going to go into too much detail on it, but that is a method for measuring or testing your potting mix. And what it involves in is taking what kind of water is that? Distilled water, boy. So you take distilled water because you want a neutral base on that. You don't want anything too acidic or too alkaline. So you take that water and pour it through. And what happens is you have a collection area underneath, and what's called leachate comes out, Leachate. And so when you pour that distilled water through, it collects probably over about an hour's time into what's called a leachate. And there is available calibrated meters that can test what is called electrical conductivity, which is another way of measuring soluble salts. They refer to it all the time as EC. So this method tests for EC, which is your soluble salts, and it also will test for pH level in your mix. So they're calibrated meters. I don't know what they cost or anything, or if it's worth the expense, but that is a way that you can test your potting mix. Okay, vegetables. The thing with vegetables is they need at least 6 hours of sunlight each day. Root bearing vegetables need it more. They need full sun, but you can get by with leafy vegetables with some partial shade. That's okay. Now on vegetables, look for what are called bush type or dwarf varieties, because you don't want your plants to get too big for the container, or you don't want to have to get a container that's gigantic. Okay, so these are suggested for growing vegetables. And the larger container, up to 5 gallons or so, ensures better success, because like I've said before, if your container is out in the heat and the wind, it will dry out more. So a larger container just allows the plants to stay moist as needed, and for the roots to ensure successful growth and to prosper and thrive that way. So it's just suggested that if you can, where necessary, use larger containers. And over on the right, I have just some examples of a minimum container size for various vegetables and how many vegetables to put in each container and the size of the container. So that's just a handy little guide. And here's some recommended vegetables for spring and fall: carrots, radishes, onions, leaf lettuce, and cole crops. Some of these, like onions, leaf lettuce, for sure are shallow rooted. So I think most of these really are not a problem as far as deep roots. Okay, and here are some recommended vegetables for summer, such as peppers, bush beans, summer squash. And I want to mention one thing about tomatoes. The types of tomatoes are called indeterminate and determinate. Indeterminate means those tomato plants grow throughout the season, and that's fine in a regular garden. And your tomatoes grow all season long on those additional vines that are growing. But that's a problem in containers. Indeterminate plants are on the other end of the spectrum. And the thing with determinate plants is they have a fixed size that they grow to, but determinate tomato plants only grow for a short period of time. Now, there's also a type of tomatoes that falls in the middle, I guess you would say. It's called semi-determinate. These type of tomatoes are harder to find, I'm pretty sure, especially compared to indeterminate. But semi-determinate plants still grow to a fixed size, but the beauty of those are they have a longer growing season. So if you're going to grow tomatoes in a container, keep an eye out for semi-determinate plants. So now let's talk about herbs just a little bit. Herbs require a pH in the range of 6 to 7 for most herbs. So that is acidic. Anything below 7 starts getting acidic. Many annual herbs start from seeds, and most perennial herbs start from cutting or division. Now, herbs require full sun, because the more sun you have, the better flavor the herbs are. And what you want to do with culinary herbs, if you don't want to make it a hassle, is try, if you can, to grow them close to your kitchen area of your house. Now, that's maybe easier said than done, but depending on where your kitchen is at. But if you could, kind of keep it close so that you're not going way across the yard to go get your herbs for whatever your cooking is. But that's just a minor little suggestion. And harvest perennials less heavily. You just want the perennials to keep growing, whereas annuals, it's one and done type of thing. So you can harvest those a little more intensively. But most herbs anyway are perennials. It's at least culinary herbs. And what I'm talking about today is culinary herbs. And what you want to do with herbs is you want to move the perennials indoors during the winter, because the winter could be kind of harsh on herbs. Now, here's some popular culinary herbs that are easy to grow. You got parsley, sage, rosemary, and thyme. And anybody who's 60 or older probably saw that one coming. Now, I challenge you, if you know this song now, to try to get it out of your head the rest of the day. But in addition to those herbs, there's also basil, there's chives, there's marjoram, oregano, cilantro, and tarragon. And so these are very popular herbs to grow. And the thing with these is you don't have to really do anything special with herbs as you do with everything else, because the soil still needs to be, slightly moist, as with any other container plant. And they require a lot of sun. So you're not really going out of your way to grow herbs any differently than you would anything else. All right. And then finally, I just want to say on mint. Well, first of all of these herbs, you probably, as you can see, the pots on the right, the way they're set up, they're probably one type of herb per pot. But if you were to grow several types of herbs together in a bigger pot, just stay away from growing mint with anything else, because mint will take over. Regardless, you want to grow mint in a pot that's separate. Plant it separately. Okay. Now, I just want to take a few minutes to talk about some berries that you can also grow. Some berries that are possible to grow in Kansas. And so, they take a little bit extra work to grow, but it is possible to do it successfully in Kansas. And so I would suggest that, if you haven't done it before, just give it a shot and see what you can do. Now, here's the deal with blueberries. Blueberries require a pH, a low pH, as you can see, 4.5 to 5.5. So what I would do if I was growing blueberries is I would make my own potting mix. I would use that Canadian sphagnum peat moss, because like I said before, that is a very low pH. And the other thing I would do is I would keep the lime out, because, like I said before, some of these potting mixes also add lime. So in this case, you don't want to add lime because you want to keep that pH really low. And the thing with blueberries, if you want better success with blueberries, it's suggested that you cross-pollinate it with another variety in another container for an enhanced yield. It's not totally necessary, but if you want a better yield, cross-pollinate it with another variety that blooms at the same time, that the two bloom at the same time. And what you want to do is put it in a pretty good sized container. I think it is anyway, 24 inches deep, 24 inches wide, just give it plenty of room. And it's recommended that you grow species that are called half high. Half high is more compatible for containers. And if you want, there is a suggested mix you can put together. Like I said, if half of it is sphagnum, peat moss, again, Canadian sphagnum, if you can find it, that would help with your pH. And then you can control the other part of the soil mix. And I would say half of it, the other kind of potting soil mix, like I showed on that one slide where you create your own, except like I said, keep the lime out of it, no lime. And the thing with blueberries is on fertilizer, you avoid using the following ingredients in any fertilizer. Check the fertilizer. You do not want to use anything with nitrates, fluoride, and you don't want to use aluminum sulfate, any aluminum sulfate in your fertilizer, because nitrate, chloride, and too much aluminum can be toxic to blueberries. Now, what I show here is what's called ammonium sulfate. And there's also urea for fertilizing. This has been suggested to be used. Now, ammonium sulfate will help lower the pH. So as you put more ammonium sulfate in, that will keep the pH coming down, or to bring it down if necessary. And the other one is urea, which is a nitrogen type of substitute. So, and above all, or well, not above all, but in addition, be sure that you do not over fertilize these, because blueberry roots are extremely sensitive to salt injury. And so what looks like here is like it's a lot of trouble to grow blueberries, but I don't really think it is. So I think it's really worth giving it a shot, especially because blueberries are outstanding. But these, what I'm spelling out here, are really the only issues that you got to be sure you do with blueberries. And with blueberries, you got to overwinter them, because here's the deal with growing anything in containers is in the winter, the roots in those containers are exposed, in the sense that the ambient temperature, which is the temperature that surrounds the container, is cold versus the temperature that would be underground. So the roots are very sensitive on container grown plants in the winter. And this is one, since it's a perennial, that you would want to overwinter either in an unheated garage, or possibly, depending on your container, an easier solution would be to bury the container down into the ground a little bit during the winter to protect those roots, and then scatter, probably semi-heavily, straw around it to insulate your plant. So, but nevertheless, on blueberries, overwinter protection is required. Okay, strawberries. It's another one that's fairly acidic, required, and it needs full sun. And it's suggested that you find varieties that are called certified virus and disease-free cultivars. It's less trouble, because you have less chance of having to deal with those kind of things. And there's three kinds of strawberries. There's what's called June bearing, which supplies one crop, usually around mid-May to mid-June. That's very popular. Everbearing and day neutral both provide two crops, one in spring and then later in the summer, fall time period. And I believe everbearing around here is another one that's very popular, the everbearing variety. And with strawberries, it's suggested, this is a University of Illinois recommendation, that in a container that you fertilize those every 3 to 4 weeks. So for this kind of plant, you just read the directions on it, but it's suggested that every 3 to 4 weeks is sufficient for fertilizing strawberries. So that's basically not as often. It's another one that requires overwinter protection. And I would say the same way as the blueberries. And finally, there's raspberries. Again, it's another one that takes an acidic potting media, container media, and they do not bear fruit the first year after. They have to wait a year. They have to be growing a year before they start producing fruit. It's suggested in Kansas, especially at least southern Kansas, where we're located, that you use black and purple raspberries because the red ones over here on the right can sun scald in our region. They're susceptible. And since raspberries are brambles, pruning is suggested. I don't know if you've ever tried to grow blackberries. Well, raspberries are the same way. They're brambles. That means they just have vines that really start taking off and go all crazy on you if you let them go. So that's why raspberries are suggested that you keep them pruned. And with this plant, the larger the container, the better. And it does require overwinter protection also. Okay. Now it's showtime. We're going to go into ornamentals. And ornamentals in container gardening is where you can really let it go all out as far as landscape design. You can really be as colorful as you want in this area and really add pop to your landscape. And that's what I like about the ornamental aspect. And the thing about ornamentals, especially on the front area entryway to, for instance, your house or such, if you ever notice people that do this, the thing with these containers for ornamentals is they draw such attention to them. Your eyes are just drawn right to them. It's a focal point. And, if you keep symmetry in mind by shapes and sizes, it's really amazing what you can do with containers and ornamentals. And the thing with colors is you have two choices. You can make the colors kind of in harmony with each other, or you can make them just really be contrasting. And that's the beauty of it. Again, this is up to your own discretion. You can look in catalogs and stuff and get ideas and just really do something special with it. And of course, annuals are more visual in this area. And one thing to keep in mind, though, is when you are growing plants like this, it's wiser to group those plants that have the same requirements. And because of this, in the area of ornamentals, it's better to do some planning ahead of time to know, again, what the requirements are, and then, of course, how they fit together as far as color and texture and things like that. So you don't just haphazardly throw it all together. It takes some pre-planning up front. That's something you might want to do over winter and stuff to get some ideas of how you want your landscape to look with this type of container gardening. And with ornamentals, be sure to deadhead them throughout the season because it keeps it clean looking, first of all. And by deadheading it encourages more flowers to grow on those particular plants. So just stay on top of that throughout the season and make sure you are taking the dead spent blooms off once it's time for them to go. And another note is perennials. may need wintering indoors. It just depends on what the what zone those plants are, the hardiness zones that those plants are suggested for. If you happen to have plants that maybe are 2 zones less than what we are, which is 6B, you may not have to overwinter them indoors. Probably don't, but it's really for the hardiness zones that are further south of us if you were to try to grow perennials in a container, or yeah, perennials in a container that are ornamental. Now, there is a design concept called thrillers, fillers, and spillers. And I like this concept. It adds a lot more excitement to a container versus just having one type of plant in that container. And the thing with thrillers, fillers, spillers is you have a tall focal point, and that's what is called the thriller. That's where your eyes hopefully or possibly could go to first. That's the focal point of the whole container. And then around your thrillers are what's called fillers. That just fills in the container, so it doesn't look so sparse, and it kind of hides maybe the spindly look of your taller plant behind it or in the middle. And finally, you have what is called spillers, and that's just the cascading down over the pot. And there's a reason for that. So on thrillers, this is the centerpiece of the plant. It's creating a vertical aspect to the plant, tall and upright, hopefully with colorful foliage. And you want to either put it in the very middle of the pot of the container, and if the container's out in the open, you do want to put it in the middle. But if your container is up against the wall somewhere, on the side of a house, or in an entryway up against it, you can put that thriller to the back of the plate of the container. And because thrillers potentially might have a weight problem with the container, if necessary, counterbalance that where the location of the thriller is with stones in your plant, in your container, so that it keeps it balanced, so that there's no tipping factor involved, and that would be introduced with that particular type of plant. And so here's some examples of thrillers. Fountain grass is very popular as a thriller. That and elephant ears and such as that, because they really stand up. There's hydrangeas. Here's hydrangeas. Those are taller plants, and they have some good color, and it really looks good against certain fillers around it, and you can have it tie in with your container. And salvia is another interesting one. We can grow salvia very successfully in this area, so that's one that should be very popular. And here's the deal with this, in this particular example here, and we're going to see it in other examples too. But what you have here is you have purple salvia, and then you have purple flowers with it. But the deal is, even though they're both purple, they have completely different textures. So it works. You could have 2 colors that are the same, but if their textures are so different, that causes a contrast. But at the same time, they kind of have a harmonious blend to them too. So that's another design aspect of it. Okay, here's some more examples of thrillers. Look at these elephant ears. If you do not have a heavy container below it, you definitely would want to counterbalance elephant ears or the cannas over here on the right, because they would tip in a wind. So it's suggested you have a heavier container so that you don't have to worry about counterbalancing necessarily. And here in the middle is cordyline. That's a very pretty look to it too, with a very gated look to it on the leaves. So I like corn. Now, fillers. What fillers do is, like I said, they complement the thriller because they fill in all that middle space with the thriller can't or doesn't do. It adds volume to your container. So you surround that filler, that thriller with your filler and weave it in and out through the thriller as you can, and create different textures, mixed colors, textures, mixtures like that. And what you want to do is you just want to complement the thriller. You don't want to overwhelm it and take the focus off. Really, what the intent is that the filler is supposed to draw the attention first. Here's some examples of fillers. Petunias, that's popular around here, something to consider. Dragon wing begonias is another one, and those are pretty solid plants. Makes a good filler. In this case here, it does not have a thriller involved, but I still included it because it would make a good filler if you did have a thriller also in addition. Impatiens is another one, and I don't have a filler with this, but impatiens are very popular around here and make a really colorful filler for your container. Very colorful. Some more examples of fillers is ornamental cabbage or kale. And this is a different look. This is really a neat look, I think. It kind of gives it a old time look, I think. And so you put things like ornamental cabbage and kale. And then right here, you also have things like Dusty Millers. It looks like Dusty Millers anyway, I'm pretty sure it is. And see how you have these different textures and colors, and in this case, they complement each other. They don't contrast vividly or anything like that, but they really complement each other. Lantana is a good choice, very pretty flower, and that makes a good filler too. And with these elephant ears here, this is a good look right here for this particular container. And coleus is another one. A lot of coleus is grown around here, and that adds a nice. In this particular case, look how you have this green filler, this deep green filler, and then you have kind of a very light greenish yellow. I don't know if I said filler. I meant thriller if I did. You have a dark green thriller here, and then your filler has kind of a yellowish green look to it. So it makes a really nice contrast here, but it's still greenish in nature. And finally, you have spillers. And the purpose of spillers, really the specific purpose of spillers is just to soften the edges of your container. Okay, so when the spiller sprawls over the side of the container, it just gives it a softer look. And you know what you use with, usually with spillers and flowers, they usually, generally speaking, they have a smaller flower on them, if they have flowers at all. But what that does is it's supposed to complement or contrast the other flowers. So as you can see, as we go through this, it does take a lot of pre-thought as far as what you're going to use. You know, first of all, it has to be something that's easily, well, it doesn't have to be, but it makes it nicer if it's something that's easily available in this area, unless you order it through a catalog or such. But you know, to do it right, I think you really have to plan ahead and know how you're going to design this, to put it together. And again, as a reminder, if you can, make all of the requirements for all the plants the same that you're putting in a container, because it makes it easier when it comes time to for location, for watering and fertilizing. So here's some examples of spillers. Ivy's a really good one. Ivy and sweet potato vines. You know, you have the green sweet potato vines, you have black ones. You have green ones, you have darker ones. I think they're blackish color or whatever. I usually just deal with the green ones, but there's 2 or 3 different colors of sweet potato vines. And that really makes a good spiller. Creeping zinnias is another one. And here between this one, well, this one here is, as I mentioned before, has really small flowers on them. And that's, like I said, generally when you're using spillers, that's what you want. Because again, the smaller flower on your spillers kind of provides a contrast to maybe the bigger flowers you have on your fillers. Here's some more. This is silver spur flower. I don't know how easy that is to, as far as availability around here. This particular picture here was in Pennsylvania at Penn State. So that's where this plant I know grows, but see how it hangs over. And this is a big container. So see how it hangs clear down almost to the ground. It touches the ground. That's a good one for a container that size. And here's one of my all-time favorite flowers right here, lobelia, because number one, it has a bluish look, which with flowers, generally speaking, is, well, it's much more rare to find a blue flower. And lobelias are just beautiful. And so I think that makes a really nice spiller. And then portulaca, which is also known as rose moss. See all the color here. This is growing by itself, same way this lobelia is, but it would make a really nice spiller also in this kind of design. So putting it all together, I'm just going to go through a few examples, quickly, just to give you some thought of what it can be done. And in this example here, this is a Dusty Miller, which is actually being used as a thriller. It doesn't, clearly it doesn't go up high as what you would expect a thriller to do, but it stands up above what is used in the filler part. So it doesn't, a thriller does not have to tower over a container. It looks nice when you use something like this too. And see how the Dusty Millers and the petunias, the purple and the silver kind of contrast, and especially when used with this container. And there's also Silver Falls dichondra. So between the three, purple and silver, with this container, just makes really a nice look. Forsythia and daffodils, here's another example where your thriller and your filler are the same color, but the texture is so different between the two that it works. So it's a contrast by texture. And then throwing in the hyacinth, using either blue or purple, and down here, they're actually using this as a spiller, which I find that kind of unique. Well, very unique actually, how they're using that, but it works. Another one, feathergrass, very popular as a thriller. Gazanias, and this orange with that kind of greenish yellow looks good. And then they have just kind of on one side of it, they have a dichondra as a spiller coming down the side, and two different colors in this case. Here's another one. Here's crotons. Every time I see the word croton, I get kind of a hankering for a big salad. I don't know why, but crotons are very, very nice looking plants as fillers. And colocasia is also known as elephant ears. In this case, these are green ones. So that is always good as a thriller. Again, with the sweet potato vine, you got two different colors here on each side. And in between, kind of in between, you have a coleus, what's called a strawberry drop. So between the three, you have, a little bit of different texture. You have some nice color contrasting. So this is really another one nicely done. And looking at this particular container, just is another piece of the design, just how they used it. Okay. This is kind of a fall look where we're utilizing chrysanthemums as a filler, and what's called euphorbia, and switchgrass up here above. Switchgrass has really a good fall look about it. And down here in the spiller is what's called lily turf, and ornamental kale, I think, is being used more as a filler, but it's kind of spilling over the edge too. And here's another fall look, the crotons again, and chrysanthemums. But what they did here is they put miniature pumpkins in. just for a seasonal look. Ornamental cabbage kind of gives it a seasonal look, and you have a trailing foliage here. Honestly, I failed to identify this one, so I just called it a trailing foliage. But and here, if you look at this particular planter, this looks like this might be a concrete one. So that's utilizing that. And that has a nice look about it. This is a really nice fall look. Okay, we're about to finish here. So what I've done here is I put all the different K-State publications that you could use when deciding to do container gardening vegetable wise, and how to grow flowers in pots, but I also provided what are prairie bloom perennials or prairie star annual flowers that are successful in this part of Kansas, that can help you deciding how you want to put your flowers together. And I believe in this particular PDF here, Growing Flowers in Pots, it gives some, I think, if I recall, it gives some examples, diagrams of different kinds of flowers you can grow together. I believe it uses the same design concept, filler and spiller. And there's also a PDF for water-wise plants, trees and ornamentals. And I included it specifically for the plants and the ornamentals because down in that particular document, it gives us some more examples of what works in this area, and also ornamental grasses for the Midwest. So they're all K-State publications that you can utilize, and it really comes in handy for when you want to design not only your ornamental gardens, your containers, but also your vegetable gardens too. Okay, here's something I put in. If any of you were in the 2019 at the 2019 garden tour, there was a particular garden over in the Whitetail area. It was just a beautiful backyard. But what I want you to see here is take a look at this garden here. And if some of you probably remember it and remember how beautiful it was. But now watch this. Look at all the containers this particular garden used in their landscape design. You know, it just blends in so well, but see how they utilize it so much. It's not just up on a front porch. You know, if you have the area to do it, this is another good use of containers because it just adds another dimension to landscaping because it's kind of adding a little bit of a vertical dimension. And so it takes your eyes off of just ground level and brings it up a little bit. But this particular garden did, I think, a beautiful job of utilizing that. So what are the key takeaways from all this? Number one, containers are a good option when garden space is limited. And that was usually when you think containers, that's why, because your garden space is limited. Be very sure that you do not use regular soil out of the ground in a container because it will compact. It will compact in probably not very much time. And then what's going to happen is your roots are going to suffer. Your plants are going to suffer tremendously. They're not going to have the proper pore space to thrive. So between that and drainage are probably the two most important things. But also container plants are going to need more frequent watering and fertilizing. Keep that in mind. And it sounds like a major maintenance deal, but it's not. It's not really. You know, having to be vigilant as far as watering and fertilizing is not a deal breaker, really. And again, like I said, good drainage is very important. The container mix and the drainage may be probably, I would say, are the two most important things. Okay, plants grown together should have similar needs. It just makes it easier for you as far as maintaining, because then you can treat them all the same in that container. You don't have to try to, and I'm not even sure it's possible if you could separate each out if it has its own specific needs. So in a sense, that's kind of an obvious statement, but just keep in mind. and know the plant's sunlight requirements. Because when you are doing containers, you have to keep that in mind, because sometimes when we use containers, we keep them close to the house or such, and they may not be getting the proper amount of sunlight, or trees could come into play and cause a problem. So just before you place that container, especially if it's going to be heavy to move, know what that plant's requirements are going to be in regard to sunlight. Okay, and also just keep sign out for the sign as when to repot or replace a mix, as it was mentioned before. And sometimes the plant itself will tell you, but like I said, as far as roots, when the roots start growing out the bottom or even up towards the sides, it's time to move up to a bigger container size. And of course, the mix, you can tell when it starts getting old and such, and does not serve its purpose anymore. And remember the thriller, filler, and spiller design concept. It's not the only concept, but I just think it just adds a lot more of excitement to a garden as far as landscaping, a yard as far as landscaping. And I would like to say that gardening is the slowest of the performing arts. I don't know who the author is, but it's really true. And when you have the show of color, and when you really get good at this, or and such, this is an enjoyable type of performing art to do. And containers themselves just add a whole new dimension to it with the showy aspect of it, plus all the other things we've mentioned. But it truly is, gardening is the slowest of the performing arts. Now, a little housekeeping. Need to point out that K-State Research and Extension and the Master Gardener program are committed to serving all members of the community, and all are invited to participate in other programs that we offer. So keep that in mind. K-State is an equal opportunity employer. And also, I want to point out that if you have any questions at all in any aspect of gardening, that we do have a Master Gardener hotline. You can see the number there, and also an email address, and you can call the number anytime and leave a voicemail. Especially the way it's currently set up. You can send your questions by email, and if you have a specific problem in any area of your gardening, something that's very specific, we appreciate getting good detailed photographs of the situation. It makes it a lot easier to analyze the situation. And also, I will mention that the hotline is occupied by a Master Gardener Monday through Friday between the hours of 9 and 12, and then again between 1 and 4. So if you want to directly talk to somebody on the hotline, that would be the time to call. But like I said, if you need to call some other time, you can still leave a voicemail. Okay, and one more thing, we have a Bloom and Grow event coming up on May 1st at 3 o'clock to 6 o'clock. It's a drive-through event, and as you can see, there will be garden kits given away, one garden kit per carload. It says here where to enter from from 21st Street. And what will be given away is vegetable garden kits or pollinator garden kits, your choice, as supplies last. We do have limited supplies, but when they're available, you have a choice between vegetable garden kits and pollinator garden kits. And included in the kit are plant material, information on growing plants, a list of online resources, and they're also throwing in other fun giveaways. So this is a new event, and so we are taking advantage of the situation we're in with the COVID thing. But this is one way to do it, and we are utilizing it. We are utilizing this way through a drive-through to be able to do something like this for the community. So keep that in mind, put that on your calendar, May 1st from 3 o'clock to 6 o'clock. Okay, that ends this presentation. So if there's time left, or I guess there's time left for some questions, I will unshare my screen here. Okay, so if anybody has a question, hopefully I can answer. Oh my goodness, there's 19 comments.
Some of it was a little bit of some technical difficulties that we had at the beginning, but I think some of those got fixed. And I think you answered some of these other ones at the beginning. So the first one that pops out at me is, do you completely replace your potting mix in the pots each year, or should you just add some new stuff on top?
I would replace it because what happens is when it gets old, what happens is it stops serving its purpose. And if you use the old, you're just taking up space that the new mix would use for its purpose. And like I said, the 4 functions are, well, 3 of them actually, in this case, would be a problem if you kept the old mix in, because it would rob you of having a reservoir of your nutrients, and it would rob you of providing oxygen and water for the roots if you kept the old mix in. So you want to replace it all so you get the full functional purpose of the mix.
Okay, good deal. Now we've got some questions on fertilizer. Does fertilizer go bad? This person has had some sitting around in the house for a little while.
Ooh, that's a good question. What I guess I don't know what for a while is, but you know what, I think that is possible because herbicides and fungicides over time weaken, you know, especially if they're in a garage with or a shed where the temperatures are extreme. I'm going to take a stab, especially if it's a liquid fertilizer. I think it probably would break down if it's been a long time and you have temperature extreme. I think the answer would probably be yes in that case. So
like maybe a few years is going to be your maximum.
Ooh, any other master gardener on here want to answer that one? Because personally, I'm not so sure a few years is bad. You know, I was thinking, you know, more 10 years and such. A few years might still be okay. But if somebody, another master gardener here knows for sure.
So for the person that asked that question, maybe they can refer to the Master Gardener hotline.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And then is there a general rule on how often to fertilize containers?
Well, you know, the mix usually when you first use it has nutrients in it already, pre-mixed if you get commercial kind. And that mix generally lasts a couple of weeks on its own. But then after that point, I believe that it's good to fertilize every couple of weeks. Now, if you want to dilute your fertilizer and fertilize every other time you water, I believe what you would do is take 1/4 of that solution and include it in your watering. So basically over a 2-week period, you would be using the whole amount, but you would be spreading it out over 2 weeks. You're basically diluting that mix so that it's spreading out. It's not hitting it all at once, but you're doing it every other watering.
Okay. And then if you use fertilizer on vegetable plants, would you still consider that organic?
I'm not, honestly, I'm not an organic type grower, but I don't know what the rules are as far as organic gardening, but you know, it's very possible that it wouldn't be because you know, they're probably, I think organic, they're more talking about a controlled mulch and such. So, you know, if I were just to guess, I'd say no, but that's just, I better not answer that. That's another hotline one for that because I don't know enough about organic gardening.
I think that's okay. It's okay to, you know,
Yeah,
refer to other people.
absolutely.
Okay, can you use composted horse manure in planting?
The deal with manure is that's touchy. You don't, if the manure has been in the compost for at least 4 months before you use it, if you're using, basically, if you're going to use manure, you need to use manure in your, put it in your compost, either cook the compost enough to kill everything in that manure that could be detrimental to you as far as diseases and such, or you need to let that compost sit for quite a while. I think it's at least 4 months before you're going to use it. You don't want to put it directly into your plants right away. It's got to sit it's either got to cook a long time or cook thoroughly, which is like 160 degrees or so, over a period of time to kill and I'm going blank on what the components are in manure, but you want to kill all the junk in it, right? That can make a person sick, or it should sit in a compost pile for over the winter, over many months before you decide to use it near your plants. I hope that answered that.
I hope so too. If that was your question, Marcia, you can ask a follow-up if you need to. Okay, if my container is sitting directly on the ground, do I still need a water catcher underneath?
The thing is, if it's on the ground, if you're talking about the ground, well,
I am reading that to say ground.
Yeah, just the ground versus the patio and such. No, you don't.
Okay, the picture that you showed at the end of that garden on the tour, what was the lavender purple flower in the foreground? Do you remember?
I don't remember, but I'm wondering if it was salvia. It might have been. I can't remember, but I sort of vaguely remember it, and it seemed like it might have been salvia.
Okay, we'll take your word for it.
Well, I'm just recollecting.
And someone had asked about where we can find copies of those PDFs, and somebody later included a link. So if you're looking for links to those PDFs, that is in the chat box as well.
Okay, now let me just interject here on PDFs. You can't go to a PDF direct that I'm aware of through a link. So what you do is search on that title and then put K-State, and then it'll bring it up, because what happens is you go to a link and then it kicks off to PDF. Going to a PDF directly, as far as I understand, you can't do. You have to, it's like a separate link, and then it kicks over to that PDF. So what you do is you search for that title and then put K-State, and then you'll find it that way.
Okay. You can link to a PDF, but if it's not set up correctly.
Oh, well, okay.
Or in such a way. So if I can't find semi-determinate tomatoes, do I want indeterminate or determinate?
That's your choice. If you have a big container, you might try indeterminate, but you'll have to, stake it up with some strong kind of material so it doesn't flop over on you. Or if you don't want to do that, if you go with determinate, just be ready to only have harvest for a very short time. So you could use indeterminate if you have a big enough container and you stake it up enough that it won't flop over on you. Have a heavy cage around it.
And as people are hopping off, because we have hit our 7:30 time, I just want to draw everybody's attention to the link in the chat that I shared to our survey, so that you can go in and let us know what you thought of tonight's program, any suggestions you have for future programs. We really do appreciate your feedback on those, and we will be sure to share any comments with K-State Extension Office as well. So just a few more questions that have come in. Oh, and I'm sorry, I think I missed this one before. Can you use regular potting mix?
Regular potting, yes, you can. You just have to be careful. Just read the ingredients on it. And yes, regular potting mix is fine. When they call it potting mix, it usually has a soil component in it. And they don't always pasteurize or sterilize it. So keep that in mind. Well, absolutely, you can use it. You can use it. They're very careful on the terms, and that's why I think they call it potting media, because you see them call it potting mix, you see it calling potting soil, you see them call it potting soil mix. So that being the case, based on the different ways they call it, just look at the ingredients and realize that it may have a component of soil in it, and it's usually going to be sandy loam or just loam, and that's fine. But if it's got soil in it, unless it's been pasteurized or sterilized, there's a chance that you could have weeds or other factors in it that a soilless mix would not have. So just be careful on the ingredients, but that's fine.
And then one final question. If your potting mix says feeds for 2 months, can you believe that? Or should you begin to fertilize a little bit earlier?
That's a good question. I would say if you use one of those, what is considered reputable trademarked brands that I showed earlier, I would trust what they said. If it's just some who's ever heard of this one type thing, I would be skeptical. It's possible, but if you go with the reputables, the ones that were listed on the presentation, and if they said that, then I would be more apt to believe it. But it's my understanding, though, you can get 2 or 3 weeks out of it, then you should consider starting to go with a routine.
All right. And then just one final question was again about the PDFs, and I'll refer you back to the link that one of our attendees shared in the chat window. It says publications, and it's the link, and you should be able to find the list of documents that Kevin referred to.
Okay.
Or you can take that slide that he offered and just search for those documents.
Yeah, when this is archived, I guess I can go back and look.
Correct. We will be, we are recording this, and so we will be producing it and putting it out on our library YouTube channel here probably within the next week or so. So that brings us to the end of our questions. Kevin, you've given us a lot of information tonight and a lot of really great ideas and inspiration for container gardening. So that's awesome. So I just want to extend a thank you to you and also to the entire Master Gardener program there at K-State and Extension, and all of our speakers from this wonderful series. It was so informative and interesting, and I, as a beginner gardener, am super excited to get started. So anyway, thanks everyone. Thanks, Kevin, and we'll end the series right now.